and Susie are still out of town, so you're stuck with me for just one more week. But first, I want to start off by saying that it is a pleasure to be up here. And I just want to say, I'm just going to talk to Pastor Mike for 1 second. It's such a blessing to be your youth pastor. And we really do have the greatest pastors. I promise you that I work for them, and I see them every day. And you guys only see them once a week. They're the same people that you see on the stage. Thank you so much. The same people you see on the stage. It's such an awesome opportunity to be the youth pastor here. But I'm Pastor Caleb. I'm the youth and young adults pastor here. So if you're in youth, you should come to youth group because it's awesome. And if you're a young adult, tonight is a young adults night. So we will be at my house, and we'll be having food, Bible study. It'll be awesome. If you want my address, you can go talk to my lovely wife, or you can talk to me. I'll give you my address. And then you can come to my house. And that sounds creepy. But you can come to my house later, and we'll have a Bible study. It's so fun. We have fun. 18 to, you can justify any age as a young adult, and I'll believe you. So, but this week, we are continuing our series on steps of faith. Last week, we defined faith and how to grow in our faith. We talked about 5 steps. We talked about repentance, talked about fasting, talked about reading your word, tithing, and prayer. So I really hope you guys challenge yourself this week to change up your routine. Maybe you added one of these things. Maybe you asked God to search your heart and you repented and you turned away from your sin, or you started reading your word more, or you started praying more. You fasted something this week. I really hope you guys decided to challenge yourself and grow in your faith in something. But this week we are talking about how we put our faith into movement, how we put our faith into action. Now, when I say moving on your faith, most of us think of this. You can put that meme up there. We look at this picture, and we see that in this picture, it says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. It's a chicken walking to KFC. So when I say talking about putting your faith into action, putting your faith into movement, most of us think of this meme. And we're like, I've tried that before. I've tried to tell my friends about Jesus. I've tried to tell my family about Jesus. I've tried to take something different, and I tried to follow God's calling on my life, but I just went to my butchering. And this chicken is probably walking to his butchering, and he's probably walking to KFC. He's going to get killed and made some fried chicken for someone to eat. But when we understand that when we put our faith into action, when we put our faith in God into action, then we just walk past our KFCs of life. We see this big roadblock, our KFC, and we're like, man, I can't walk past that. But our faith in Jesus, man, he pushes us past that. Now, trust is crazy, because when we take this step, we have to obviously trust that God's got our back. And trust is something that we don't like to give. Now, once in a while, we go to Wendy's. My wife and I, we go to Wendy's for a quick dinner. And for those of you who know Wendy's, they've got this like $5 like meal deal. It's great. It's great. So I go to Wendy's, and I get a chicken sandwich every time. So I get this chicken sandwich, and I'm like, I just want it plain. Nothing on it. I'm plain. I'm boring. You guys can judge me later for it. I just want it plain. I'll put everything I want it on at home. So I get home, and I'm so excited for my chicken sandwich. But then I get home, and obviously Wendy's never gets anything right. I'm not going to tell you which Wendy's I go to because I don't need them spitting on my food. But I get home, and man, they threw everything on it. And I'm like, man, all I ask you to do is throw a chicken patty on a bun. How hard is that? But I get home, and I'm so disappointed. So I have these trust issues. In human nature. So I take these trust issues in human nature, and, I take them to God. So God calls me to something. He says, I need you to take this step of faith. I need you to do something. And I'm like, well, the Wendy's didn't get my chicken sandwich right. So how can I trust that you've got my back if Wendy's doesn't have my back? So we blame these trust issues on God, and when he asks us to take a step of faith, we can't. He says, son, daughter, I need you to do this. I'm calling you to something different. Have faith in me. And he says, take the step. And you're like, man, I just went to Wendy's last night, God. I'm not going to take my step today because I need Wendy's to prove themselves before I can trust you. So we have this struggle with God, fighting him to take our step of faith when we need to. God calls us to put our faith into action, put our faith into movement, and trust in him because he's got better plans for us than we can ever understand. But he's asking us to take the step of faith. So we read in the Bible in James 2, it says, what good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them the things needed for their body, what good is that? So also, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. So we cannot have faith without our works. So Callaway's birthday is this Thursday. He's 1. That's crazy. We've kept a human alive for 12 months. Sorry, I have helped keep a human alive for 12 months. Bree's really done all the hard lifting. But I have participated in this 12-month process. And so his birthday is this Thursday. So we're baking him a cake. So we tell him all about this cake, and whenever Callaway sees food, this is his reaction. He points at it every time. Every time. So he points at this food, and he's like, And so we tell him about this cake. We show him this cake, and he looks at the picture. He's like, And so we hype up this cake all week. Then we tell Callaway on his birthday, actually, psych, I'm not going to make you this cake. How does that relate back to the Bible? So we have this faith. Callaway has this faith that we're going to bake this cake for him. He's so excited. He's ready to eat this cake. And then, we don't put what we said into action. We don't bake him this cake. He gets disappointed because when he put our faith in us and we don't have action, there's nothing. It's dead. And we have now created a trust issue with Callaway. We need to understand that when we say that we're going to bake the cake, God's going to bake us the cake. We need to have faith to take that step, to trust in him to bake us our cake. Then it continues on. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. So show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one, do you? Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Was not Abraham, our father, justified by works when he offered his son Isaac at the altar? Abraham believed God, and it was continued by his righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. See, that person is justified by works and not by faith alone. And in the same way was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works, the way she received the messengers and sent them out by another way. For the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. You cannot have faith and you cannot just have works. It's like a marriage. For those of you married in the room, your strengths are your partner's weaknesses. So they complement you. And then the other way around, their weaknesses are our strengths. We complement each other. So faith and works should complement each other. We should not do faith without works, and we shouldn't step out in works without faith. They complement each other because when we do them together, when we step out in faith by God, then our works get miracle. Because then we step out and we do this. The goodness of God is shown because we had faith in him. Abraham took his son up at the altar and was going to sacrifice his son. And then God showed up. He said, hey, I see that you have faith in me. Your works have shown your faith. And then he gave him a lamb. Then Rahab, they were going to plow through the city. They were going to kill everyone. They were going to burn it all down. And then Rahab took these spies and he says, I need you to save my family. So they said, you need to put down this cord and we will save your family. They plundered the city, but saved Rahab's family because she took a step of faith, and she took her step of faith by showing in works. So we're going to dive into a couple of stories. Now, I read 1 Kings for the first time in my life like a couple months ago. I read through it and I was like, I've read 1 Kings before. Never read 1 Kings before. 1 Kings is crazy. So we see the prophet Elijah is in 1 Kings. So God calls Elijah to go to Zarephath. There's a huge famine in the land, and then there's barely any food. So God calls him to go to Zarephath. 1 Kings 17:10, it says, so he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, there was a widow gathering sticks. He called her and asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar, and I have a drink? She was going to get it. He called, and please bring me a piece of bread. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son so that we may not die. Elijah said to her, do not be afraid. Go home and do what I have said. But first, make me a small loaf of bread, and then make yourself a small loaf of bread. For this is what the Lord of God says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry till the day of the Lord sends the rain on the land. So then she did as Elijah said. So she made him bread and then brought it to him and then made herself and her son bread. And then, wasn't she without? So if one of you, and we're in a drought and we're a famine, you walk up to my door and you knock on the door and says, I need you to make me a piece of bread. Now, Bree, we buy organic King Arthur unbleached flour, okay? And then we buy organic avocado oil. So if you would knock on my door and we're in a famine, and you ask Brie to make you some bread, and she's running out of her King Arthur unbleached flour and her organic avocado oil, she's going to say no. She's not giving you any of her organic ingredients. But this woman, man, she was running dry. I only have a little flour left. I only have a little olive oil left. But Elijah says, I need you to trust the God of Israel. It will not run out. So her faith got put to test. And what did she do? She trusted in God, and she took her step of faith by going and making that bread. Gave it to Elijah, and what happened? Miracle happened because her jar of oil never ran without. She never ran without her flour because she trusted in the God of Israel. God showed up. Now, for those of us who have animals in the room, some of us, not me, but some of us, we buy this water bowl. It's connected to like a jug of water, and you fill up this jug of water and you put it in the bowl, and then it continues to fill up. Now, like I said, I don't buy that for my animals because I just don't love them enough. But we buy this for our animals because we want them to always have water. We want it to always be filled up. Now, when we have faith in God and we trust in Him and we give Him everything, and He says, I'm going to keep you filled up. We're connected to the source. Our water jug will never run dry because God continues to fill that water jug up, so our bowl continues to fill. But for some of us, we're not that connected with the source. We're not that connected with God, so when He asks us to give, our water bowl's empty. And so we have to put more faith in Him. Man, we need to go read more. We need to go pray more. And we need to go get back connected with the source, and He'll pour a little water. But if we're not always connected to the source, we'll run out sometimes. But if we're constantly living in connection with God, our jug will never run out. We'll be constantly connected to the source. So when He tells us, give, 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 we'll always be filled. And that's what happens. When we put our faith into motion and our faith into action, we see that God shows up. And we see that God will never leave us without and will always be filled. Next story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We read that in Daniel chapter 3. We read in verse 1, King Nebuchadnezzar had a gold statue made 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. When you hear the trumpets followed by the oboes, lyres, zithers, and harps, and then all the other instruments will join in as soon as the music starts, you will bow down and worship the gold statue. Anyone who does not bow down and worship will immediately be thrown into a fiery furnace. So he made this huge statue. This huge statue, and he said, every time music plays, I need you to bow down. And if you don't, I'm going to burn you. And you're going to die worse than drowning. That's my biggest fear. Death of drowning is my biggest fear. But if I lived in these days, death by a fiery furnace would top it. So when they don't bow down, they get thrown in this fiery furnace. Now, it would have taken some huge faith to not bow down, to not worship that God, because God of Israel says to His people, don't worship any other God, worship me. So we read later on, verse 12. There are some Jews whom you put in charge of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who are disobeying your majesty's order. They do not worship your God or bow down to the statue you set up. So these three boys, they decided to trust God. They decided, you know what? God said don't worship any other God, so I won't. So when King Nebuchadnezzar put this statue up, they said, whenever the music plays, I will not bow down. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to worship the God who shows up. I'm going to worship the God who's already proven Himself. So when we continue on reading, it says Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're talking to King Nebuchadnezzar, and he says, Your Majesty, we will not try to defend ourselves. If the God whom we serve can save us from the blazing fiery furnace and your power, then He will. But if He doesn't, we won't bow down to the gold statue that you set up. So they're walking into their death. They've signed their death certificate. Walking into the fiery furnace, he says, King Nebuchadnezzar, we're not going to bow down to your statue. If the God whom we serve can save us, then He will. But even if He doesn't, even if we die and we burn up in this fiery furnace, if we did it all over again, I'm still not going to bow down to your statue. I'm still going to have faith in God that He'll save me. So when we continue on the story, we read that they bound Him up. They took them on, and the guard taking them into the fiery furnace died because of how hot it was. But what happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They walked into the fiery furnace, and there was a fourth man in the fire. And they were saved because they put their faith into movement. The miracle happened because of their faith in God, and God showed up. Now, it doesn't say that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got thrown in the fire fighting. It doesn't say that they screamed and whined like our kids when we're throwing them in their room for timeout. That's not what it says. They were bound up and they got taken in. Doesn't say they fought. Doesn't say they tried to whine or flail or throw their bodies. They went in the fire because they trusted and had faith that God would save them. This leap of faith is hard. This leap of faith of taking your faith in action and taking your step is difficult. But when we understand that when we put faith and works together, our faith in God, God will always show up. Now, that's all I have for you today. But we have a special guest. Now, it's a youth student, so you can give him a break. I think it'll be okay. But we have a youth student finishing our message today. So, Scott, I have your sermon ready for you. So, there's a youth student. His name is Scott.
No, I got it.
Okay.
No, I don't want you talking for me. It'll be okay. Okay, Caleb, whatever. No, that's fine. It's fine. Hi, good morning, guys. If you don't know who I am, because you probably don't, my name is Scott. I've been a youth student here for a little over a year now, and I'm just really excited to talk to you. I'm going to be honest. I'm a little nervous, but I'm really just very glad that even though Caleb's being mean, that he's sharing this stage with me. And a big thanks to Mike, who's not here. Maybe he's watching. Hi, Mike. But big thanks to him for letting me on his stage. But if you've been here for last week and this week, you know that we've been talking about taking steps of faith and how you can do that. And Caleb's been talking about all these stories. Like last week, we got to see Caleb pray from a wheelbarrow because he was running around with it, which I thought was funny. I got a picture of it. And then this week, he talked about all these great stories. But when he came to me and told me about this, I made sure, I was like, okay, I'll do it. But you have to leave me my favorite story. And sure, I am probably biased, but I really think that my story is the best. I'm going to be honest, I'm younger, which makes me better than Caleb, respectfully. And I'm just saying, we saved the best for last, and not just me preaching, but in this story. And my favorite story is the story of Peter walking on water, which we kind of saw a little bit of the bumper. And to really get a full grasp of this story, we have to start in Matthew chapter 8. You see, in Matthew chapter 8, Jesus and the disciples go out onto the Sea of Galilee. And when they go out, there's this huge storm. And this storm just surrounds their boat, and the disciples flip their lids, right? They're running around, they're going crazy. And in their freaking out, they're like, hold on, where's Jesus at? Because they can't find him anywhere. So some disciples run out and they go to find Jesus. And when they find him, bro was just sleeping. He was napping, harder than I nap when I get home. And when I nap, when I get home after church, I sleep for 3 or 4 hours. And when they're horrified, they run over to Jesus. And they're like, dude, you got to get up. Do something. We're going to die out here in this storm, and you're just sleeping. This is not nap time, buddy. And Jesus gets up, and if you don't know how this story ends, it says Jesus gets up, and he rebukes the winds, and he rebukes the waves, and there's a great calm. See, when we read this, we're in shock and awe. We're like, wow, that's cool. We see it, we sing about it, we're like, wow. And you just imagine the disciples are cheering and they're happy, but actually they kind of got yelled at. Because when they wake Jesus up, he even says to them, he looks at them and he says, you of little faith. See, Jesus wasn't upset because he was having a great dream and they woke him up, right? He was upset because they didn't have faith in the storm that they were in. And he wanted faith at their core. But Jesus was a teacher. So Jesus, in Matthew chapter 8, tells the disciples when they're wrong and corrects them. But just a couple chapters later, he teaches them and shows them how to do it right. And that brings us to Matthew chapter 14. You see, in Matthew chapter 14, right after the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, okay, you guys are going to go back across the sea. I'm going to go up to the mountain and pray. Kind of you go over here, I'm going to go up there, we'll meet in the middle somewhere. I'll meet you over there, we'll be good, right? And the disciples go back out onto the water, but this time by themselves. And again, there's another huge storm, and this one's way worse than the first one, right? And we saw it in the video. There's these huge waves, and there's lightning, and there's thunder, and the disciples freak out even more than they did the first time, learning nothing. They're not walking by faith in this. They're horrified. And when they look out, they see the lightning and they see the shining, like glowing person, and they think it's a ghost. And in that moment, they just lose it. Like they are at top tier, running around, not doing what they should be. And Jesus sees their fear, and he says this in verse 27. It says, "But Jesus spoke at them at once. He said, 'Do not be afraid. Take courage. I am here.'" And right in the next verse, Peter kind of talks back to Jesus, and he's like, "Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." And then Jesus says to Peter, he says, "Come." And then we see Peter walk through the storm with Jesus. Which, if we could just pause there for a second. Peter, who just thought he was going to die, who was just absolutely horrified of what he was seeing, is told, "Don't be afraid. Take courage." And the next thing he does is a miracle. So for us as believers today, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we walk on water through our storms with Jesus? And the worship team can head on back up while I get into point one. But point one is this. It's to have faith and obedience in listening. You see, the first thing Jesus says to the disciples, he says two things, two commands. He says, "Don't be afraid and take courage." Which, okay, I'm just saying there's a lot of irony in this command because Jesus is there and he's like on top of the water. He's fine, right? He's God. But the disciples are in the boat and they're horrified. They see these giant waves they've never seen. Thunder is booming louder than they've ever heard, and lightning's like 5 feet away from them. And Jesus has the audacity to say, "Don't be afraid." But this happens a lot for a lot of us. It feels like God tells you to do something that just doesn't make sense. But it's by having faith and obedience and listening to what God calls you to do that you can be like Peter and do the miracle. But there's also that second part. It's not just don't be afraid, it's also take courage. Because it would have been real easy if Jesus was like, "All right, guys, don't be afraid. I'm going to calm the storm like I did last time." Because then the disciples could just sit back comfortably and be like, "Okay, we've seen this. Right? We're good. We're not worried about it. Why would I be worried? I've already seen him do it." But he says, "Take courage." And when he says that, he doesn't just mean just sit here in the boat and like trust me that I got this. He says, put your fear aside, take courage and move. Take actions of faith in the storm. And that's what we see Peter do. He puts aside his fear, takes courage, and takes a step out of the boat. And that's point two, is to take your step of faith. See, it wasn't a miracle when Peter was in the boat, but it became a miracle when he stepped out, when he was on top of the water. That's why so many of us 2,000 years later still look like idiots like walking to our pool. We're like, "All right, I believe. We got this," right? And then we fall right through. But Proverbs 3 verse 5 says this. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean onto your own understanding." See, Peter was a fisherman. He knew the water better than anybody else who was out there. I mean, except maybe Jesus. But in this moment, he had to let go of everything he knew. All of us know if I threw somebody out into the water, they're not just going to skip across like happy as can be. They're going to sink down into the water. But Peter put his own understanding to the side, took courage, and had faith in Jesus. And when he did that, he could take his step. But here's the thing, Peter didn't just take one step, he took a multiple. And that needs point 3. Keep your eyes on God. As you walk, you have to be focused on Jesus. That's why when Peter says to Jesus, he doesn't just go to Jesus and say, "Lord, if it is you, tell me to just walk around. Tell me just walk around aimlessly through the storm. Let me do what you do." No, Peter looks at Jesus and he says, "Lord, let me come to you walking on the water. Let me come to you walking on the water." You see, Matthew chapter 6, verse 34 says this. It says, "Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." God doesn't want you to worry about the fear of tomorrow or where that next step of faith is going to take you. He doesn't want you to be sitting there like, "Well, if I do this, what if my friends get mad? What will my coworkers think? What will my boss think?" What will all my friends think? What about the people at school? What if they make fun of me? But God says, don't worry about tomorrow. Each day has enough trouble of its own. He just wants you to step in faith. Because Romans 8:28 says this, for those who walk by faith, God causes everything to work together for the good. God doesn't want you to worry about that next step because he holds that next step. And as long as you step in faith, he will walk you towards your good today. And I can promise you that much. So maybe you're sitting here and you're in your boat right now. Maybe you're looking out at the water and you see the waves and you're getting blown around by the wind and you see the lightning and you're horrified. That's okay. Because your storms are going to be scary. Even Peter, who I've been sitting here talking so highly of, had a moment of weakness where he got scared. And we saw it in the video. If you noticed, he looks away from Jesus. And in that moment, the moment he took his eyes off of Christ, he began to sink. And Jesus picked him back up. So church, what I'm trying to tell you today is don't focus on the fear that is sinking your ship. Because when you start listening to the fear is a liar. And when you start listening to him, he's going to start telling you things that just aren't true. He's going to say you're in this alone. He's going to say only by your own strength can you get out. And when you start to listen to him, you pick up a bucket. Because you see the fear coming up around you and you see the water getting higher. So you go down and you try to pour it out. And you go down and you try to pour it out, but it just keeps rising. And you keep trying by your own strength, so you pick it up and you pour it out and you don't know what to do. And it's getting louder and it's getting higher and you're scared. But in your weakness and in your crying out, you hear another voice. Another voice saying to you, don't be afraid. Take courage. I am here. And it's in this moment that we need to put down the bucket. Look out onto the water to see our Savior standing there and calling us away from the pain that we're in. And when you see this, you need to take your step.
It's an awesome reminder for us to look. And if we believe the Bible is true, to look at these stories. Like I said, if only we believe the Bible is true. And we look at these stories and our faith can be built. Because we can see all ways that God shows up. God's there. We can see all these miracles happen. And we see God prove himself time and time and time and again. Man, just like Scott said, it's a powerful reminder that we need to keep our eyes on God. So if you guys want to stand up today, and the prayer team can come forward. Now, I know most of us were like, okay, I'm a believer, altar call, I need to check out. I've already accepted God, I've raised my hand, he's in my heart. But this isn't an altar call for people who want to accept Jesus. This is an altar call for people who have already accepted Jesus. And we can stand in our boat today, and God is telling all of us, there's a plan for all of us. God has that plan for you, and maybe God's been in your ear about it. Maybe God has said to you, I need you to take this step today. And you've pushed it off. Then he reminds you, I need you to take this step today. Well, then you push it off. And today is that moment. God's been in your ear about it. He needs you to take this step of faith, and you've been wanting to trust him, but you haven't had the built-up faith enough to take that step. Well, now is your moment. You can come forward. You can kneel at the altar, or there's a prayer team up here. You can get prayer. But this is a call to action. This is a call for anybody who wants to say to God today, I'm ready to take that step. I'm ready to finally go to my battlefield at my schools, the battlefield at my work, the battlefield at my household. And I'm ready to take my faith. But God, I'm ready to do it with you. So as we sing this song, like I said, the altars are open. The prayer team is available for anybody who is ready to take their faith out of their boat and trust, have your eyes on Jesus for your miracle. We'll be back to close in a minute.